And welcome to another edition of the CBB Central Podcast. We are rolling right along. We had a coach interview with Coach Dave Paulson that I hope you all enjoyed, that you guys listened to this week. We've got more coaches coming this summer, so be on the lookout. Be very excited about that one as well. So it's fun time for the podcast. Also, it was a fun time for the podcast because each of us got to watch some basketball in person this week. And there was TBT going on, which was fun. Wet your beak a little bit. Brad, I watched a little bit, but it was more exciting for me to be out on the road at a recruiting event at the NCAA Basketball Academy at UConn. See some things at a live period event that got, I would say, very mixed reviews at best.
Yeah, I think I saw Corey Evans had a breakdown where he said Keon Ambrose Hilton and Ty Berry, who are both ranked between 80 and 120, look like LeBron James out there, which kind of speaks to the level of talent where guys who are top 100 in their class are elite basketball players, but when they're surrounded with other elite basketball players, they're good. Maybe they score 10 points a game in EYBL, but in a setting that has a lot of low major or even D2 or D3 prospects, they're going to look exceptional.
Yeah, I thought the talent criticisms were warranted. I thought there were, depending on the games you went to watch. So, when I went to watch games, I always targeted the games with the most talent. I think most evaluators would. They want to see guys. I thought usually there was one clear high major guy on the floor, one maybe high major guy on the floor, 4 to 6 pretty good mid-major guys, and then mid-major, low-major guys, and then the rest were low major or D2. I thought that was pretty much how it broke down for me. It depended on the game, obviously. There were some games that were better. Like during session 1, I saw a game with Zed Key, who's a high major kid for sure. Jack Malloy, who's a 2021, who I think will wind up at a high major. Silas Mason, who's going to be a high major kid, he's fringe top 150 recruit. Gabe Dorsey was in a game there. He's going to be a top 150 recruit in 2021. Same deal with Noah Farrakhan. He's a 2020 who Providence is recruiting, actually getting an official visit there. So Reese Brown play, who has a Rutgers offer. I think he's probably more of a priority mid-major recruit. I thought the guys who stood out the most were the clear high major guys, and then guys who had all these mid-major offers, but would have been role players in EYBL at best. And those guys looked like the best player on the floor. So I think that's kind of the talent level that you're looking at. There's no really easy way to fix it. I wrote about it. I've talked to some people about it as well. There's no reason, from a lot of college coaches' perspective that I've spoken to, there's no reason they believe for good high major kids to ever go to this. This isn't the NBPA top 100 camp or a USA basketball camp that is perceived with a level of adoration for going to it. It is not a destination spot. It is a camp that it just doesn't have a lot of pull right now, and there's no easy way for the NCAA to convince kids to start coming. With that, that's just going to make it very difficult to become I don't know if sustainable is the right word, because I think it was sustainable. I think in fairness to the NCAA, it was very well run. The drills were sometimes a little childish, sometimes were very good. You got to see guys get coached, which was nice, but for the most part, this is not going to become a premier recruiting event without players, and I don't think they're going to get the players. So, mixed reviews. I thought the NCAA did what they could to make it good, but there was nothing they could do to make it good because it wasn't really necessary in the first place. The NCAA is somehow in belief that Peach Jam is the reason why kids are getting paid under the table. That is not the case. I can attest to that. I think every single coach in college basketball would say the exact same thing. And I got a message today from a coach that I was speaking with, and he was talking about the event. And one of the things he said at the end was, it's not a good evaluation setting, but more importantly, it's not solving the problem. The majority of bad guys in the CBB landscape are family members. This isn't fixing anything. Hammer the college coaches who cheat if you want to clean it up. I think that pretty much sums it up. The NCAA tried to stick a Band-Aid on a broken leg. The Band-Aid was a very nice Band-Aid. I thought it was a good camp, like I said, but until it gets better players, it's going to be seen as a second tier or third tier recruiting event.
Yeah, I think that analogy also works because, the timing of this camp really doesn't make much sense. Where in the previous recruiting calendar, the kind of line of thinking that, coaches like AAU coaches and kind of people guiding these players would say is, if a coach isn't watching you in July, then you're like a backup plan, or like, it's like if Providence offers you and you don't see any of the coaches at any of your games across the 3 events, then all right, maybe my Bryant offer is more realistic for me, right? So it's kind of like by this point in the calendar, you kind of know where you are, right? So for a high major guy who's already established, like maybe if this camp was in like April or something, and some guys could still make moves, and kind of really generate more of a recruitment. But after the AAU stuff, I mean, it's kind of like you're kind of already, for the most part, pigeonholed into a level and have your top 7 schools or whatever already. So it's kind of a little too late as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, they need to bring back Vegas. They need to bring back, this weekend was always all the best players were in Vegas. They were playing in different events across, the desert. There was, great talent on hand. Every coach was there. That was a recruiting period that was loved by coaches because it was a place where, you could see all the guys you want to recruit. And I think that was something that, people were really mad that is gone. Bring that back. If you want to have this thing, I think it should be in June. I suggested put it up against NBPA Top 100. If the NCAA is smart there, they will understand that it is going to be very difficult for them to ever get high major players of this, or at least a big number. But at least you might be able to get kids to come play who don't make NBPA because they know there will be some high major assistants, because high major full staffs aren't going to go to NBPA. They're not going to send 4. They're going to send 2. So that means 2 can be spread out across the country watching. So you might get some high major players. You're not going to get any worse than you were at this. So then this opens it up and make that NBPA week a full live period event. Let these kids get seen at this camp, NCAA camp. The top kids go to NBPA, then maybe a JUCO event, which would be helpful to make things very balanced out. I think that's the way you do it if you're going to keep this going. The NCAA is going to keep trying. I don't know how successful it'll be, but it's just not going to work long term unless they get players. That's the bottom line. A camp is going to be defined by whether they can get talent. I thought they did as much as they could, but at some point. There has to be a reason why kids are going to go, and right now there isn't a reason for kids to go. Exactly.
Should we move on to the Pan Am Games?
Yeah, absolutely. You were there at the scrimmage, correct?
Yes, I was there Wednesday night. They played the East Coast All-Stars, which, if I remember correctly, they go to Europe and they play 4 or 5 games, and it's really a mishmash of, I think, just coaches who have an in, send a player or 2. And that's kind of how the roster is constructed. The best players on this East Coast team were clearly John Mooney for Notre Dame, whose defense was pretty horrible, but his offense was exceptional. He spaces the floor. He can score on the block. With his back to the basket. He's a very versatile offensive big man. And then also Buddy Boeheim for Syracuse made some good plays. Jim Boeheim was in attendance, but Buddy hit some threes. Put the ball on the floor a little bit. He's really exposed as a ball handler beyond like 1 or 2 dribbles, and he was susceptible to some of the Pan Am team's ball pressure, which was excellent, by the way. But those were the 2 kind of standouts. A few other guys hit shots, and then Sacred Heart center Jarrell Spellman, who averaged like 3 blocks a game. I mean, he looked the part. I mean, he was long and athletic. He didn't do a ton, but at the neck level, I mean, he's a very interesting player. And so, I mean, the game was a rout. When Buddy Boeheim and John Mooney are your 2 best players against this Big East All-Star team, I mean, they didn't have a chance. But so, in terms of kind of who played where and how much, so they rotated the 3 bigs across both the starters and the second unit, and so So Grosel got the start, but then Watson and Weidman too. They all kind of played equally with both the first and the second unit, like they were the first sub and the first to come back in. So they were really mixed matched. Then the remainder of the starting lineup was Colin Gillespie, Miles Powell, Alpha Diallo, and Jermaine Samuels. Powell was clearly the best player on the floor. I mean, he was awesome, knocking down shots, making plays off the dribble, very high IQ, making smart defensive plays. He was really impressive. He can really finish at the rim too. He has great touch on his drives. Alpha Diallo played a really nice floor game. Didn't do too much offensively. Jermaine Samuels shot the ball well. He looks like a ideal modern day stretch four, and he was really good defensively, especially with his hands. Gillespie was fine as the point guard, but that's kind of the team's weak point, I think. Point guard play, because David Duke just didn't look natural at point guard, despite getting 9 assists. Because he's a weird player where he has a pretty high basketball IQ. Like his floor game is very good. It's just when he's the point guard, he just can't create a ton of offense either for himself or for others.
Sorry,
go on.
Is he like a Halliburton type where like he's a really good passer but like a secondary creator? Is that
like when he's the point guard and he's trying to like create off the dribble because he's not very good at pick and roll. So he kind of dribbles and then gets stuck and kind of turns around, and then he doesn't shoot it well. Right. So he's much better off the ball, like Halliburton is. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the match with Pipkins long term will be really nice there because it'll let him, be freed up to be a good ball mover, secondary creator, defender, etc. And then you can let Pipkins go create and ball screens and go get shots.
Yeah, because Duke is super athletic too, and he has great size at 6'5". So that's the size combo there is not an issue. I thought that the second best player in the scrimmage was Tyshawn Alexander for Creighton. He was making plays. He was lights out from three, great on defense. Another guy who's a smart player, unselfish player. And so rounding out that second unit was Duke, Tyshawn Alexander, Mustafa Heron, Miles Cale as a small ball 4, which was interesting. And then it was Watson, but the three bigs, as I mentioned, rotated through. Watching Miles Cale kind of reminded me of all the Seton Hall I watched this season, where he'll make some amazing plays. He's super athletic. He can get to the rim and get to the free throw line, but he does not have a very good feel for the game. There are a few plays, especially one where he was on a 3-on-1 fast break, and he was planning on passing it to, I think, Alexander on the wing, and they cut him off. So he picked up his dribble, jumped in midair, thinking that Mustafa Heron was in the corner when he was at the top of the key, and just fired it out of bounds. And then he had another play where he missed Miles Powell wide open on a cut. That was a very, very, very egregious miss there. But Heron looked fine. Cale was fine besides the occasional low field play. And then AJ Reeves, who's the 12th man on the team, he didn't play much in the first half, and then he knocked down a few threes in the second half. And then Pipkins and Sean McDermott are both hurt and aren't coming, and then Malinowski was the only guy to get cut. So that's the breakdown of the 12-man team. Apparently they haven't won gold since 1984, so I think that they have a good shot, I guess, this year. This is a good team, but the last team had Melo Trimble and Torian Prince and Denzel Valentine and Anthony Randolph, and it didn't win. So I don't know.
And when do we get started with that?
July 31st, which is Wednesday.
All right, exciting. Yeah, it'll be fun. It's basketball to watch. Hopefully the U.S. team is able to find a way to win gold for the first time in 35 years? Would that be?
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. So on to our deep dives today. We have Missouri State and Virginia. How are we getting started, Brad?
First, I need to make a correction, because for the past 2 months, I have been wondering why Dante Bassett and Austin Davis didn't grad transfer. And it's because they can't, because they weren't redshirt juniors, they were only redshirt sophomores. Now they're redshirt juniors. The thing with these years is, I mean, between the team website, between Verbals, between College Reference, between ESPN, I mean, they can have all different years because sometimes they count the redshirt year at the end, sometimes they count it when it happens. But anyway, I think we've gotten that confusion squared away. Bassett's only a redshirt junior this year, and so is Austin Davis. So they could have not grad transferred.
No, it was actually hilarious for those of you listening because I get a random text in the middle of the week that was like, "I've made a mistake. Dante Bassett is actually a redshirt junior," and I was like, "Okay." It just didn't even register to me that he had been saying it wrong this entire time. I was really convinced it was fine, but
yeah, I mean, no one said anything. For those who don't know, we're talking about the second or third string center on Florida is Dante Bassett, and then Austin Davis is going to be the third or fourth string center on Michigan. So I mean, this is really minute stuff.
Yeah, so the only man left on the why in the world did you not grad transfer list is Ed Morrow?
Yes. I mean, I actually have this list. I can pull it up here if I still have it. Alex Olashinsky for UCLA.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Dante Bassett, Austin Davis. Nope. Sam Timmons for Washington. Because I mean, between Isaiah Stewart, they have Brian Penn Johnson, they have Hamir Wright. Dylan Smith doesn't matter anymore because guys left there, so he's going to play. And I said Nolan Narain, too, for San Diego State.
All right. I am confident that we are the only podcast bringing you the why didn't you grad transfer list. So if you're on the fence about listening in the future, do not be anymore. Deep dive season?
Yes.
All right, we're starting.
Missouri State synopsis. Now, the synopsis isn't as useful for Missouri State because there's so much turnover on this team. Out of their projected top 9 for this year, only 3 of them are players who played last year. But last year, which was Dana Ford's first year coming home from Tennessee State, 172nd in KenPom, 16-16 overall, 10-8 in the Missouri Valley. 199th in offense, 158th in defense. I mean, when you're that high, it's kind of indistinguishable there. 287th in tempo, which is interesting. Really weird thing. Stat to the point where I might be interpreting the stat wrong. They were 321st in assist to field goal ratio, despite having a point guard in Josh Webster, who was a Texas Tech transfer, who was nationally ranked in, I think, the top 100 in assist rate. So, they're kind of supporting cast of guys like Keandre Cook, who's back this year, Jared Dixon, who's gone, Tulio Da Silva, who's back as their center. They weren't really sharing the ball despite having a high assist point guard, a lot of isolation scoring from them. So they were.
Keandre Cook, excuse me as I jump in here, had an assist rate as a secondary ball handler of 5.6.
Yeah, he was 0.7 assists per game as a perimeter player.
Low. He's a bucket getter, is what he is.
Yeah, 0.7 assists. That's worse than black hole big men. But so they were 23rd in forcing turnovers and 48th in defensive rebounding. I mean, they have a glass cleaner in Tulio Da Silva. They only had Obadiah Church for 11 games. He was in and then he left the team. Then he came back, I think. But he was really promising center prospect, a rim protector. And even with him kind of in and out of the lineup, 42nd in block rate, 55th in steal rate. And this was a really weird stat that was indicative of their defense. 352nd in defending the 3-point line. 40% was what an opponent shot from 3. I'm not even sure how that happens. I mean, that's just kind of inattentive perimeter defense. Kevin, do you know the one team that allowed a higher percentage of opponents made threes?
Oh God.
I'll give you a hint. It's a mid-major team that people, people that kind of study it to the minutia that we do thought that they would be okay, but they weren't.
I don't know how much that hint helped because there was a lot of teams we thought would be okay, but they weren't.
I'll give you another hint. They had two grad transfers who were pretty notable.
Oh crap! Who is that? I know who this is. I just can't put. There was a school we were convinced they had added the grad transfer, they'd be fine, and they weren't. Oh, just tell me.
Denver.
Oh yes, of course. The Denver.
Ronnie Harrell and Torrey Miller.
Yes, that's who it was.
Okay, and then just two more here. 305th in bench minutes. That's definitely going to change the season as we're going to go through this very deep roster in a minute. And then they were 26th in experience, but only 301st in minutes continuity in Dana Ford's first year. They had Church, who was a senior, briefly. They got a waiver for Tulio da Silva. Josh Webster was a grad transfer, but only 301st in minutes continuity from the new regime.
So here's an interesting couple of stats before we get into the in and out that you didn't necessarily mention, but or maybe you did mention them, but you didn't quite mention them in the way that I wanted to be brought up. So you mentioned the 3-point shooting statistic. Team shot 40% against them, which was 352nd in the country, 3-point defense. But what's interesting about that was last year, only 37% of opponent shots were threes, which was the 114th fewest. However, at Tennessee State, his teams gave up 47.4%, 44%, 41.4%, and 42.6% of 3 points attempted per total shots, which were all 332nd or worse in the country. So his teams have always given up a ton of 3 attempts. Last year was the first time they've gotten absolutely killed for it. But last year they also gave up fewer attempts, which is very interesting. They generally force a lot of their team is based on getting downhill, drawing a ton of fouls, forcing a ton of turnovers. That's really how they're built. They always have been. They press some. They play kind of a slower press. The Valley as a whole is a really slow league. I don't have this stat in front of me, but I'm pretty sure the Valley plays the slowest tempo of any league in the country. It's just how they do it. I remember Bradley was 280th in KenPom tempo. And so I tweeted when Bradley was speeding up the game against Loyola Chicago, this is definitely not what Bradley wants, just because I was scrolling through KenPom at the time. And I get all these replies oh no, Bradley plays way faster than Loyola. They're the fastest team in the Valley. And I was what in the world? So it's one of those things the league is a slow playing league as a whole, which is something to keep in mind when you look at the tempo the Missouri State team plays going forward. And looking at their tempos, they did play. He never really played that fast at Missouri State or Tennessee State, excuse me. Was never above 164 in tempo and was 300 in tempo his last year in the OVC.
Yeah, so they were 287th in tempo in his first year at Missouri State, and then you mentioned 23rd in forcing turnovers, 42nd in block rate, and 55th in steal rate. That's kind of shows the defensive tendencies there.
Let's go through the incomers and the outgoers because there's a lot of them. So we have 2 grad transfers, 2 transfers becoming eligible, 1 JUCO transfer, and 4 freshmen. So we have the 2 grad transfers being Lamont West, who comes in from West Virginia, a stretch 4 who can play on the perimeter. Wasn't super efficient for West Virginia, but a guy who has high-level physical gifts in especially in the Valley. Anthony Massington Bonner is a guy who they bring in from Colorado State, averaged 11 points a game, high-level shooter, perfect to slot in either in the last spot in the starting lineup or in a bench role. I mean, that's just a huge pickup. Those 2 grad transfers could have absolutely went to multiple high majors. They choose to go to Missouri State. They get 2 transfers eligible, Tyreek Dixon and Josh Hall. Both were sit 1, play 2s. Both played for really good winning programs. Dixon at Middle Tennessee State for Kermit Davis, Josh Hall for Nevada. And and Eric Musselman, two guys who were rotation players. Hall, I believe, came off the bench. Dixon was starting point guard. So those two guys should slot nicely into the rotation. They added JUCO guy who's one of the best in the country, and Gage Prim out of South Plains JUCO, a true back-to-the-basket big guy, a bruiser, who'll give them a different element, let them play bigger or smaller when they take him off the floor. And then 4 freshmen, 4-star 2020 reclass Ford Cooper, and then 3 very solid mid-major recruit on the wing in Jamonte Black, Isaiah Mosley, and Taim Freeman. Going out, Jared Dixon, Ryan Krecklow, Josh Webster, Simon Wojcik, and his brother, and Obadiah Church as well. So a lot of turnover, but it's a nice mix of grads, immediately eligible guys, JUCO guys, and freshmen. So it's not like they're bringing a massive freshman class, not like they're bringing in all transfers. They do have a nice kind of mix of guys that will maintain some class balance. It'll also, hopefully maintain, chemistry.
Yep, and so they're at 14 guys right now with the Ford Cooper reclassification. They were at 14 before when they had DeJuan Harris, who's now off to Kansas, who kind of decommitted, played AAU, and then signed with the Jayhawks, or verbally committed to the Jayhawks. I mean, that's semantics. But they have 14 guys, so one of these guys is not going to be on the roster. I would guess either Darian Scott, who is a 6'11" sophomore who used very sparingly last year, or Kabir Muhammad, who's a senior, like an undersized physical 4-man, who's a JUCO transfer and averaged like 15 minutes a game last year. So I would guess one of those two isn't going to make it. But I mean, even so, this is such a deep team. You mentioned their recruiting class. Cooper as a top 100 in 2020, and then Black, Freeman, and Mosley. They have a really nice core going forward with those 4 guys too. Even if the latter 3, Black, Freeman, and Mosley, aren't main contributors this year, I mean, anything that they provide this year is just gravy for this team. With all these veteran additions.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. They got a 4-star reclass in Ford Cooper, and I tweeted a great get, and I'm thinking, man, is he even gonna play? I think he will, because he'll probably be the backup point guard. But it is really interesting. I mean, how quickly Dana Ford and Jace Hurl and the rest of this staff have been able to accumulate talent, which is really exciting. And it makes for some interesting rotation decisions, but when I was going through it, I didn't really feel like I was forcing guys into spots or guys were really going to be struggling to find minutes. I really felt like the roster was well constructed, whether from the point guard position, to the wings, to the bigs. They have options, but the rotation makes sense as we go through it.
Absolutely. I mean, starting at the point guard position in Tyrick Dixon. I mean, he's a guy who I loved watching on Middle Tennessee State. He's played in the NCAA tournament. He's won NCAA tournament games. He was at Middle Tennessee. He was more of a glue guy point guard. He played next to Giddy Potts and Antoine Johnson, who were more scorers. So he only averaged 5 and 3. His numbers are much better than, his ability is much better than what those numbers indicate. I think he'll be a good fit here, but he definitely needs to kind of assume more of a traditional point guard role.
Yeah, I mean, his usage, he's definitely a lower usage point guard type. I think that's probably better for him as well. He's not a super efficient scorer. He took a step back in my mind his sophomore year at Middle Tennessee State. I know there was issues off the court where him and Kermit didn't really mesh. So that's never what you want with your point guard. And so I think that probably contributed to him leaving as much as Kermit Davis did. But he's a guy who takes care of the ball. He can step out and shoot a 3. He's good. He's good. He's got a good handle. He's crafty. I think he works as a starting point guard in the Valley. I don't think he's necessarily a plus point guard nationally, if you're comparing them to an at-large team. But I think he's good enough to be a game manager for a team that has a lot of options in the wing.
Absolutely, and he'll be paired with in the backcourt a shooter, and Anthony Massington Bonner, who averaged 11 points a game in the Mountain West, shot 41% from 3 at Colorado State. Jace Hurl, who you mentioned is on the staff, was previously on the Colorado State staff. Then Keandre Cook, who we touched on in a few minutes ago, isolation scorer. He's someone who can create his own shot. And while the numbers kind of look ridiculous, like with assist rate and stuff, every team needs someone who can break down the defense and can get a shot. And he'll certainly be providing that skill on the perimeter.
Right, and it's not like he's inefficient in doing so. I mean, he was a guy who shot 44% from the field, 37% from three, got to the free throw line at a good rate. He was a turnover machine. I mean, how many guys have an assist to turnover ratio of 23 assists to 79 turnovers and are not a big guy? Like, that's pretty scary to me. I think he's probably going to start. I think you basically have three options on the wing to start. You have Keandre Cook, Anthony Massington-Bonner, and then Josh Hall. Hall was like an interesting guy in Nevada where, he always put up solid numbers, but he always was very tentative. He was a very tentative player. He didn't really want to look for his own shot. He's not really like a shooter. He's more of a slasher type. He did make about like 15 threes as a sophomore, so he can step out and shoot it for sure. But he's more of a slasher. He was very efficient at the rim. Without a doubt, helped by Nevada's outstanding offensive spacing to get you a lot of one-on-ones. But he shot 58% from two. He's a good rebounder. He's a switchable defender. He's long and athletic. I think he could slot into the rotation. I think with those three options, I think I'd probably play Cook and Josh Hall and then bring Bonner off the bench. But you could definitely argue for the shooter over the kind of wing slasher in Hall. So either way, one of them is a six-man, one of them is a starter. I'm going to project Hall there, but Bonner could absolutely wind up in the starting rotation.
Yes, so I have Bonner at the 2, Cook at the 3, Josh Hall as the sixth man. I think Hall can also give them a look as a small ball 4 too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he'll be playing all over the place. So he was a very good glue guy for Nevada. Maybe not playing with kind of guys where he would be looking to defer, like the Martins and Jordan Caroline. Maybe he takes a more assertive role, but they're not going to need him to be a big scorer. With his defense and kind of his kind of glue guy skills, he'll be very valuable on this team. Someone who I think was a really surprise addition and kind of sparked this whole idea of what's Missouri State's ceiling? Can they be an at-large team? Was Lamont West, who averaged 11-4 as a junior at West Virginia, and then grad transferred over. You mentioned before he's a stretch 4, but he's a very good athlete, and he's been a pretty key contributor, if not a starter, then like a big time reserve on the good West Virginia teams with Javon Carter. He never really developed more of an offensive game. It's kind of threes and an occasional like athletic finish, but in the Missouri Valley, I mean, this is just such a huge get for someone who averaged double figures on a good Big 12 team.
Yeah, I mean, I did mention him as being inefficient, which he was. He shot in his career, he's 40% from the field, 34% from three. I mean, for a 4-man, that's not great. That's going to hurt your team points per shot. But I think he has all the tools to be really successful in that system. He's long and athletic. He's already comfortable pressing and playing a very high intensity style of defense that will help him in this system. He can step out and shoot the three, which will help this team's spacing. He can get downhill and get to the basket. So I think he slots in as the starting 4 without a doubt. You can switch defensively with him. And I think that really helps things. I think he's probably like a 25-minute-a-game player, just like he was at West Virginia. I think that's probably the best fit with him. I don't think you need to run your bigs into the ground. You have so much depth there, as we'll get into with Tulio Da Silva and Gage Prim. So I'm a little, like I said, I'm a little bit concerned with the efficiency, especially if he thinks he's going to come to Missouri State and chuck. But he's got the talent to be a very impactful player in the Missouri Valley and really nationally. He's a guy who, as you said, a rotation player on a high major team that made an NCAA tournament, averaged 9-4 on the team in 2017-18. That was were they a 5 seed?
I think they at least made the Sweet 16, right?
That was the Carter Miles, Kanate, West team that made the Sweet 16. They beat Murray State they were a 4 seed. So Murray State was a 13, or no, they were a 12. They were a 5. They beat a 5-12 Missouri Murray State game. They beat the Marshall team that was in the
Wichita State
4-13 with Wichita State, and then lost to Villanova, who was just an absolute wrecking ball that season. So yeah, I mean he's definitely capable. He's probably the 4th best player on that team. So that's very, very big to add a guy of his stature to what was already shaping up to be a great front court with Gage Prim, who averaged 20 and 11 at South Plains College. Those are monster numbers for JUCO. He was efficient. He could step out and shoot a little bit. He's not really that game. He's more of a back to the basket player. He's a guy who is, we're going to talk about Virginia later in the show and talk about Thomas Wolden Tenze, who's a top 10 JUCO guy who's so important to their success. Well, guess who was rated higher? Gage Prim. He's a guy. There's a lot of high major guys. Gervais Green. He is truly an elite JUCO recruit per JUCOrecruiting.com, and that will certainly help in that regard. To add into a guy who averaged 15 and 7 last year in Tulio da Silva, so a chance to be a really dynamic front court with a lot of options. I think I see it playing out where da Silva plays the 5 and West plays the 4, with Prim as the first big off the bench. But then that allows you to go bigger and play a 2 big look with da Silva and Prim and take West off. Lets you just have Prim play backup. You can go small and move Hall to the 4 and play him with a true 5, play 4 out 1 in. They have a lot of options with the way this roster is constructed with the front court combined with some of the bigger wings.
I mean, what a luxury for a team like Missouri State to have these 2 centers in the Tulio da Silva and Gage Prim. Like, how many high major teams would give anything to have this talented 2-headed monster at center? I mean, Tulio da Silva, you ranked him as a top 10 mid-major center. He averaged 14 and 7 last year, hit 17 threes at a 37% clip. He's mobile. He's a good athlete. He has good touch around the rim, and he's an excellent rebounder. He was 305th in offensive rebounding percentage and 178th in defensive rebounding percentage. And to put that in perspective, there's 353 teams. So he would be the best rebounder on almost every team, right? Or at least most teams. And then you pair that with a guy in Prim who averaged 21 and 11 and also shot 43% from 3 and can really score with his back to the basket. I mean, that's such a dynamic combination there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think you have to, look at what they're able to bring off the bench. At point guard, they're bringing a 4-star recruit off the bench. On the wing, they're bringing either a rotation player on a Sweet 16 team in Josh Hall, or an 11-point-per-game guy in Mountain West and Anthony Massington Bonner. Jared Ritter, who was a top recruit out of high school, top 150, I believe, recruit. He could step out and shoot the 3. Didn't have a great year as a freshman, but a guy who could get there at some point and really help out as like a wing, defender. He could also maybe play a little small ball 4. And then Prim, an elite JUCO guy. So it's one of those things where you just don't find this type of depth at the mid-major level every day. They have the talent and the depth, not just to be a good mid-major team, but to be a good, college basketball team that contends at the, high major level for an at-large bid.
Yeah, I mean, Ritter was a guy who we didn't mention till now. I mean, he was on Xavier. I think he left before the games even started, but he was there for a semester. If he wasn't a top 150 player, he was very close. And I think he'll be like the 9th man. He'll come and play some 2, play some 3, shoot the ball. Only 31% as a freshman, but I mean that should rise, especially playing with a higher caliber of player too. So that's a top 9. Number 10, Kabir Muhammad was a rotation player last year, and is a senior. And then you have the 3 recruits, who don't even need to do anything. They can really be eased in, and it seems like people think very highly of all 3. Tyem Freeman was ranked 231st. He's like an athletic combo forward, 6'5". He's probably their power forward of the future. So anything that those 3 add are gravy. And then you have a rotation player previously who probably won't even be in the rotation this year.
Yeah, I mean, the depth is stunning. It's really impressive. And I think you also have to remember, you look at this recruiting class, Dana Ford has a ridiculous eye for talent. He was the guy who was recruiting at Wichita State who landed Fred VanVleet. He landed Robert Covington to Tennessee State. He picked up Tajir McCall at Tennessee State, who's in the G League right now, bouncing around, was in summer league. He's a transfer from Niagara, averaged like 5 a game in the MAC. He brings that guy in and he turns him into a fringe NBA player. He's a guy who's
Christian Mekawulu too.
Mekawulu as well. He has developed talent. He has found talent everywhere he's been. So this is very well calculated. Jace Hurl is a really well respected assistant who very knowledgeable in the JUCO ranks, very knowledgeable recruiting across the country. So between those two guys makes a really powerhouse recruiting duo, and that doesn't even talk about the rest of what's a really good staff. This was a hire where I hadn't watched a ton of Tennessee State. To me, it felt like a low risk, like a low risk, low reward hire. A guy who hadn't been like a smashing success at Tennessee State, partially because I didn't understand how hard a job Tennessee State was at the time. Did a little more research into that and found that out. But he was one of those guys. He was solid. He was going to coach defense. He was going to be fine. But he has looked like a grand slam hire. You were talking a year ago. They had Paul Lusk, who had so badly disappointed with a team that had Alize Johnson, a future NBA guy that had other talent on the roster. They finished 7th in the Valley, and to be where they are right now is such a testament to what Dana Ford is as a coach and the staff he's built here in Springfield.
Yeah, the first time that I had heard of Ford was that I think they were playing Duke in like a bye game, and they played him tough. Like at least through the first half, it was like very close. And then I kind of looked into him more and kind of saw that he was someone who a team should take a look at. Missouri State, took the shot, and then in 2 years he's built this really strong roster where they're head and shoulders above the second best team in the Valley. We're going to talk in a little bit. Is this an at-large caliber team or not? It might not matter, right? It could be like Wofford of this year, where they just run through the conference, win the auto bid. Now, the Valley isn't going to be a bad league by any stretch this year. It just lacks like a second clear team. Like I think Illinois State's going to be okay. Valpo too. Bradley's running it back. Northern Iowa is pretty much running it back and has a former top 100 recruit in AJ Green as their point guard. Loyola should be okay too, right? With Krutwig and Williamson. So I mean, there are a lot of options in the Valley. I'm just not sure that there's a second top 100 team. And kind of a spoiler alert here, but I have Missouri State 49th right now for me.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with the Valley, like you said, there's a lot of good players, or not a lot of good teams. There are a lot of good players, but also a lot of good teams. There's not another team that I think will be a resume win. Like there might be a bunch of teams that sneak into Q2 on the road, or will be Q2 on the road. Maybe one sneaks into Quadrant 1. The question is, what will the level of all those teams, like Evansville with Sam Cunliffe, like Loyola with Krutwig, like Northern Iowa with Green, Valpo with Javon Freeman. There's a lot of teams with a couple good players. Will those teams be 125 to 175 or 70 to 175? Because if they're 70 to 175, this is a really good league that not only will challenge Missouri State to a certain extent, but give them opportunities. Otherwise, it's a bunch of landmines of teams that play great defense and have star players who can score the basketball, and you're going on the road. And if you lose any of those games, they're bad losses. I think the strength of the Valley will make a huge difference when you're talking about building a resume for this Missouri State team if they're in that conversation.
And I saw that you mentioned this on Twitter the other day that their Charleston Classic, I think is their tournament. Their first game against Miami. I mean, that's going to really determine kind of the fate of their season almost, because not only would being Miami on a neutral be a borderline Quadrant 1 win, it moves them into the upper half of the bracket where it doesn't even matter if you lose, to a team in the semifinals or the championship of a tournament like the Charleston Classic, because they're so good that it's just like a free swing, right? It's a lottery ticket to pick up a massive win. Whereas if you fall to the losers bracket, then you really have to kind of manage the minefields, because in a sense it could be even more difficult than minefields in conference, because you're playing 3 games in 4 days, limited preparation time. Maybe someone's hurt. It's high variance situations with these preseason tournaments. And coincidentally, I didn't do this on purpose, but I have Missouri State 49th and Miami 50th. So those teams should be pretty evenly matched in that first round game.
Yeah, I was gonna say it is a huge game. I'm looking at the bracket because they're so evenly matched. I'm looking at the bracket now. They would play, if they win that game, presumably Florida, and then even if they lost, they're getting Xavier or UConn. So 4 pairings. They did a nice job of pairing like the good teams, like the good teams with the bad teams for the most part. Florida is the best team. They play St. Joe's, who's probably the worst team. Xavier plays Towson. Who those 2 teams are probably top, like a fringe top 25 team in Xavier playing a bad Towson team. UConn plays Buffalo. UConn probably on a tournament team, but definitely could be in the mix versus a Buffalo team that will probably win 20 games, and then like a true like 4 or 5 game with Missouri State and Miami, 2 teams that should be bubble teams. That's a huge matchup, because at worst you would play Florida and then Buffalo, Connecticut, or Xavier, because maybe Buffalo pulls the upset on UConn. Towson's not beating Xavier. If you lose that game, now you're playing St. Joe's right away, which is a game isn't gonna help you because they're gonna be bad, and then you're playing probably Towson and either Buffalo or UConn. Like that is so huge that they win that game, because they do have a couple other opportunities on the schedule. They get to go to Xavier as part of like a campus game in the Charleston Classic, so there's an opportunity there to play on the road against a good team. They go to LSU over the week after the Charleston Classic. They could play 5 games in a row against high major teams if things go the way they could. Then they also have Murray State at home. That could be a top 75 game, be a quadrant 2. They go to VCU, and the rest of the games they went with the let's win by 50 and boost our net, because they play Little Rock, Alabama State, Cleveland State, Mississippi Valley State, Arkansas State, and Oral Roberts. So not going to boost your strength of schedule, but they have enough tests. I think it'll be fine. I think it's a very good schedule.
Agreed. I mean, with the at Xavier game, I mean, they could take care of business even before the Charleston Classic, which would certainly set them off on the right foot. Moving on to some of the strengths of this team, and just to kind of articulate it in one section, because we've definitely touched on this throughout. Incredible depth, right? Going 9 deep, and then having proven guys, or not proven guys, but like potential impact guys who whatever they give is as a bonus with their freshmen. Lineup versatility we touched on, specifically with like Josh Hall, who can allow them to go big or small. They can go different ways in the backcourt. They can play the 2 bigs together in De Silva and Prim. They could play Cooper and Dixon together in like a smaller, fast backcourt. A lot of different options there. Their front court is awesome, right? The 2 centers, and then Lamont West and Josh Hall. I mean, that would be a pretty good front court for any bubble team, let alone a mid-major team. And then they have a ton of shooting. Their bigs can space the floor. West can shoot it. Cook can shoot it. Mason Bonner, excellent shooter, 41%. And Dixon didn't shoot it great, but I think he's a better shooter than his sophomore numbers showed as well. So, I mean, and then off the bench with Jared Ritter, the former Xavier wing. I mean, this is a well-built team, as you mentioned, and they have a lot of distinct skills.
Yeah, I think they have a lot of guys who fit into their defensive mantra, if you will. They have, Keandre Cook is a guy who's a good perimeter defender. I think Tyree Dixon can get into guys. Massington Bonner has good length. You're talking about length. Lamont West is very long. Tulio De Silva is quick and can guard on the perimeter or down low. Ford Cooper is pretty athletic for his size. Josh Hall, long athletic wing who can force turnovers. I think they can really thrive in their defensive system with that. I think that really helps for them. I was a little more concerned with you with the shooting. just because, especially if they're going to play like West, who's like a 34% shooter at the 3, or at the 4, excuse me, and then, Tulio, who can step out a little bit and shoot it, but he's not necessarily a true pick and pop guy. You're playing a bunch of average shooters. So especially if you're going to play Hall more than Bonner, I think they needed the shooter in Bonner that got him to where it's not necessarily a concern, but it's not necessarily a strength in my mind. But yeah, they check all the boxes. I'm just not 100% sure the talent level is good enough to be a true at-large team, like a true, like, clear at-large team. They could be on the ball. I think they'll be on the bubble. I don't know if you're going to get them to the point where like they're out of lock.
Yeah, so that was one of my key questions. I had 3 key questions, and we'll start with the one that you just mentioned. Is this enough talent to get an at-large? Do they have enough high-end talent? Personally, I think they do have enough. I think they're kind of missing a star. I guess Tulio da Silva could be a star, or maybe even Gage Prim. I mean, he was such a highly regarded JUCO player. But this does seem like a team with a lot of really good third best players, and can Tulio da Silva be a star for them?
Yeah, and I think the other thing you have to kind of weigh in with that is this team looks so great on paper talent-wise because you have Missouri State on the jersey. But if you put Missouri on the jersey, what would you say about the talent level? You know what I mean? You'd be like, wow, that's a pretty average SEC roster, Yeah,
I mean, depth-wise, they would compare, but not high-end, right? I don't think that they would have anyone who's as good as, like, Mark Smith. I mean, maybe Tulio Silva is, but with Mark Smith and Jeremiah Tillman.
And Drew Smith now. Don't sleep on Drew Smith.
I mean, he put up big numbers on a mid-major team.
There are a lot of Drew Smith lovers out there.
I got one guy who was a San Diego State fan and was like, why do you have Yurt-7 over Malachi Flynn? And I was like, hey, if you want Flynn number 1, I won't fight you. Like, I'm the biggest Malachi Flynn guy there is. I just went Yurt-7. He was like, no, I was just joking. I'm a San Diego State fan, but I would have Drew Smith number 1. Like, how? like was he like an AAU legend or something? Like,
I think he's like I think there's like Jalen Pickett equity. Like, he's not the same player where he's like not an explosive athlete, but he's super smart and like makes threes. Like a uber like glue guy, point guard, where he's like a good enough glue guy where he's actually like the best player on the team. Like, people think he was better than Ryan Taylor, which is probably the correct take because Ryan Taylor's bad. But it'll be interesting. If people are counting on Drew being the best player on Missouri and counting them to be a tournament team, that kind of scares me. But like let's just take the comparison. Let's just take this quick comparison because we could talk about it all day. Missouri or Missouri State? Who do you think is the better team this year?
Missouri State.
Okay. I think I would say that too. I think I would say Missouri State, but it's really close. So I think that kind of gives you the idea for where they're at, right?
Yeah. So,
yeah, I have them about 60, 65 nationally, which probably puts them outside the tournament. Maybe it's a little too low. I think there might be some growing pains. It's not a young group, but it's a group you're still trying to fit all these pieces together. And you also have to weigh in the fact it's the most talent Dana Ford has ever had. I think that's something that he's never had to deal with the egos of having 6, 7, 8 guys who should be starting and should be starting on a bubble team. So I think that's something to watch as well. I think they'll be fine. I think they'll win the Valley for sure. And they'll be in the at-large conversation if they get some of those big wins early in the season. They're going to have somewhere between 3 and 6 opportunities for quadrant 1, quadrant 2 games, possibly quadrant 1 games. They could realistically have 6 quadrant 1 games in the non-conference. And that gives you the chance, right? If you win 2 of those games, you hold serve in the Valley, you win the league like you're supposed to. You don't get any catastrophic losses. You get to the Valley semifinal. You're in the dance.
Absolutely, and then that was my second main question. With high turnover rosters in terms of players, what's the cohesion like? I mean, the example that comes to mind for me first always is Oregon, with a team with Troy Brown and Mikhail McIntosh and Paul White and they Kenny Wu, and they had a bunch of talented guys, and they just completely flamed out. And even this year, they won the auto bid, but they wouldn't have made the tournament as an at-large. And they lose bowl, but they were playing worse when they had bowl. And that team took a while to come along and kind of play to a high level. Missouri State doesn't have that luxury, right? Like they can't slow play it and maybe drop a bye game or like a game that they should win, and drop these opportunities unless they're just content with winning the auto bid and being a 13 seed.
Right, because that puts if they start dropping bye games, all of a sudden turn like Western Kentucky from last year.
Yeah.
Like if they get some of the wins, then there's it doesn't matter.
Exactly, and then my third and final question was about Tyreek Dixon, and can he be more of a traditional point guard, which I think he needs to do with this team, unless Cook with his atrocious assist mark is going to be a primary creator for others here.
Yeah, that honestly might be my favorite thing about doing these deep dives is like finding the most random statistics, and you find the really fun like team statistics, but like you're just looking at players and you see things and you're like, man, like how did I miss a guy going through a season with like a 1-to-4 assist to turnover ratio?
It's crazy. But you mentioned that you have them 65th, I have them 49th. I do want to just kind of compare them to the other teams around the bubble for me. So I have Texas one spot above them. How do you think that they compare to Texas?
Texas has more talent. I think so. I think Texas is a better roster. I think Missouri State will probably be a slightly better team. I think the other thing you have to kind of weigh is like we try to do this high major versus mid major, like all things are equal. They're not, because as long as Missouri State goes like 16-2 in the Valley, like if they just take care of business, even if they're not as good a team, if they take care of business and steal like 2 high major games, they're in.
Okay.
Right?
All right. So how about Missouri State versus South Florida?
Oh, Missouri State.
Okay. I have South Florida just a couple spots ahead.
Interesting.
Currently, but they're a team that I'm looking to move down, I think.
I think you're too bullish on the run it back thing.
Yeah.
They were like still like 100th. 100th. That was great English, Kevin. 100th.
Yeah, I'm thinking of moving them down. Another team I have in Missouri State's vicinity, Liberty.
Ooh.
Running it back.
Missouri State's better than Liberty.
Yeah,
I think like pretty clearly.
I have that too. I had Liberty at 54. I figured they were probably an NIT at large team had they not won the conference tournament, and they are running back for the most part. And maybe that's the team to move down a little bit. How about Missouri State or Georgia Tech, which it isn't a mid-major, obviously, but
I think Missouri State.
Me too. I
would argue that's a better roster, right? Like just a flat-out more talented players.
Yeah, I mean Georgia Tech has four really good players, right? With Alvarado, DeVoe, Usher, and Banks. But Missouri State has the depth. They have great shooters. They have an amazing front court. I think the front court is really what separates Missouri State for me.
Yeah, and I think it's really scary that Georgia Tech in like year 4 for Josh Pastner has a worse roster than a mid-major in year 2.
Yeah. How about one more? Missouri State or Harvard?
Ooh. I think Missouri State is a better roster.
Me too. Harvard has the top-end talent with Aiken and Towns, but
if Towns is healthy.
Yes.
Yeah, they'll be really good. They'll be right in the mix. I'm excited. I'll get to see them in person at least once this year when they come to Loyola. That is a trip I'm not missing no matter what happens. I could have one leg. I'll be there. It's like 5 miles from me, and I get to see a bubble team. Like that is money. I'll be there covering it. So you guys can look forward to that. But that should be a fun team. And here's another interesting question, talent-wise, as we get into our next deep dive. Who has better talent? Virginia or Missouri State? The defending national champions or year 2 of Dana Ford.
Well, if we break this down position by position, right? Point guard, I think it's probably a wash. Clark was an elite role player.
I think Clark has to be considered better than Tyreek Dixon.
Okay, that's fair, but they are like a very similar archetype.
Yes, but Clark did it on a national championship team, and Dixon did it on like a bubble team.
That's fair. But what? We'll get into this, but what made Clark so good was, playing with guys like Jerome and stuff. But then the two guard, you have the top 50 recruit in Casey Morsell versus a older veteran double figure scorer, whether it be Cook or Massington Bonner.
Still think I'd go Casey Morsell, but
me too.
Yeah.
The three we have probably Cook versus Walden Taize.
I was thinking Key at the 3, but sure.
I think probably Virginia has a better roster.
I think they clearly have a better roster, but the fact that you can't say like right away who has a better roster, Missouri State or Virginia, is like so fun.
Yeah.
It's so fun. But let's get into Virginia. Synopsis, they won a national championship. Is there anything else to be said, Brad?
Of course there is. Let's see. Virginia, national champions, number 1 in KenPom, even before the tournament, 35-3, 16-2 in the ACC. Second in offense, 5th in defense. Per usual, 353rd in tempo, which is dead last. They were 317th in bench minutes, so there was a clear delineation for the most part between the starters and the bench. They really only went 8 deep, and Jack Salt was starter and then moved to the bench for Giacchite. As the season went on, he played less, and that's kind of also what contributes to that bench minutes. They were 342nd in 2 foul participation. If you get 2 fouls with Tony Bennett, you're going to sit in the first half. We touched on a couple weeks ago. Cincinnati with Mick Cronin was 351st. Product of the system, they don't get to the free throw line too often. They were 293rd points off free throws. They're also 298th in points allowed off free throws. Their 4 main cogs there, Clark, Jerome, Guy, and Hunter, were all nationally ranked on KenPom on fewest fouls committed. Product of the system, but that also shows just how effective they were keeping those guys on the court. They were an elite shooting team, 40% from 3, 8th overall, and they were elite at defending the 3, 3rd best at 29%. 22nd in 2-point percentage defense was Salt and Giacchite protecting the paint. They were 28th in block percentage as well. Giacchite himself was 24th in block percentage, among qualifying players. And Jay Huff's block percentage is actually higher than at Giacchite's, but he didn't qualify. He didn't play enough minutes. And then, I got some, when I'm making my top 25, people insisting that Kihei Clark was the initiator for Virginia. Ty Jerome had an assist percentage that was twice as high and a usage percentage that was almost twice as high, probably like 80 or 90% higher.
Kihei brought the ball up the court, passed it to Ty Jerome, and then they ran offense.
Exactly.
I guess the other argument you could make would be like they ran Ty Jerome off some screens, like some down screens in the blocker mover, even though they ran less of it last year, especially because they had DeAndre Hunter. So they didn't have to run as much because they could ISO a little more. But still, he is not a high level ball distributor creator type. He is I'm going to manage the game, make pest plays defensively, get downhill, get to the rim, maybe hit the outside shot. He's never going to be an all ACC player. I think I'd be very surprised if he's ever even really in that conversation. But that doesn't make him that doesn't mean he won't be the clear starter point guard. But looking at the in and out of this roster,
just one last thing. Their NBA trio of Hunter, Guy, and Jerome were ranked. So this is top 500 in the country per KenPom. They were ranked in percentage of minutes played, offensive rating, turnover percentage. So they were in the top 500 lowest turnover percentages and effective field goal percentage. So they're pretty important, and they played a lot.
Yeah, they were very good basketball players, which is why they were drafted, which is why they won a national championship, which is why I think expectations have to be, somewhat kept in check with Virginia. But they do bring in a really good recruiting class. Casey Morsell, a fringe top 50 recruit, who's a guy who can, create his own shot. I watched a full game of his today. It was actually them against DeMatha Catholic. It was St. John's College versus DeMatha Catholic. Really good game. Earl Timberlake, top 30 recruit in the 2020 class. Hunter Dickinson, top 30 recruit in the 2020 class. Ishmael Jet, fringe top 150 recruit, undersized guard. Darius Maddox, another good recruit. So there was a bunch of guys on the floor for both teams who were going to go high major, or at least very good. Mid-major programs. Morcell was the best guy for me on the floor. He's a 6'3" guard. He can create his own shot. He can get downhill. He's physical. He can handle the ball. I think he fits really nicely with Clark with what they want to do because he can be that ball dominant 2 guard with a game manager at Clark. Tipping off here, I'm going to have him as my starting 2 guard. 2 other recruits, Caden Sheedrick, who winds up a top 75 recruit. He's like a skinny 4-man who has a ton of upside. I'm not totally sure what Tony Bennett's plan is there. I think there's a chance he could redshirt and do like DeAndre Hunter did, be a good recruit, sit out a year and become really, really, really good. Especially with their somewhat of a front court logjam. He can't play with 3. And late stock riser Justin McCoy was like a Penn State signee, like a top 200-ish recruit, gets out of his LOI and then winds up, North Carolina had offered him, NC State had offered him. He chooses Virginia. The national championship buzz obviously helped in that regard. So he's in. Those are the 3 recruits. And then also add a JUCO kid, Tomas Wolden-Tenze, who they jumped in late and grabbed, who is an elite shooter. We'll see if he can do enough with the rest of his game. And then Sam Hauser, who will sit out, will be a huge get going forward, coming in for Marquette.
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of Casey.
Hold on. Sorry. Just wanted to note the guys going out. We mentioned Guy, Jerome, Hunter, and Salt. One guy we did not mention who I think who would have had a sneaky chance to get minutes, Marco Anthony. He was like a 3. He's going to Utah State. I don't think there's a guarantee he would play especially over a guy like Justin McCoy. But he would have at least had a chance. Instead, he decided to take his chances and go redshirt a year at a good mid-major program and have a chance to play down the line.
Yeah, I think because we'll touch on this in a minute, but a lot of Virginia's ability to reach this optimistic lofty expectation of being a top 15 team is a lot of these guys who haven't done much, who have been around for a while, really need to contribute, and just have another one in the mix, like another lottery ticket, like another guy who's maybe developed enough to contribute, who has been in the system for 2 years prior, would have been pretty big. I think in terms of Casey Morsell, 10 points a game and 40% 3-point on one of the best AAU teams in the country. Team takeover Virginia. He's a scorer shooter. He's going to be relied upon, I think, to be the best perimeter scorer on this team. I mean, Wolden-Tenze, he can shoot and he can score. He's a lefty. He has good size at like 6'5". He looks a lot like CJ Ellaby, right? He has like the big floppy hair. That's Ellaby for Washington State, and he averaged 17 a game and shot 47% from 3 in junior college. It is interesting though that he kind of comes out of nowhere. He's a name that I had heard mentioned that like Illinois was recruiting him. I mean, he had a very quiet recruitment until the spring, and then Virginia pops in, gets him, and people seem to think so highly of him when they hadn't heard of him, a week or 2 prior.
The thing with him, I think, is a lot of JUCO guys, they just like shut down their recruitment during the season, and by the offseason, they expect like there to be more interest because teams have spots to fill. And he had a bunch of high majors at the end. You're looking at his statistics. I watched a little bit of his tape earlier as well. I mean, he is a guy. He's a shooter. I don't think he's going to be much more than that. He didn't get to the line that much. he didn't. He made 157 shots in JUCO last season. 100 of those were threes. To me, he's going to go into not necessarily like a pure Kyle Guy role because he can handle the ball a lot more than Kyle Guy, at least early in his career did. But I think he's definitely going to go into like the pure shooter role in this offense. And he shot 47.6% from three, so he can really light it up. He's still going to be a positive assist turnover ratio guy. He's not going to be a huge impact defender, but I think he'll hang in. He's a little skinny. I think he's probably the first guard off the bench, which isn't necessarily saying much because they don't have a lot off the bench at guard, but he helps there. He can play the one or the two, shoot the ball. I mean, in terms of just a good role player, I think that really is impactful to add him.
Absolutely. I put him in the starting lineup and moved Braxton Key to the 4, where he had a lot of success coming off the bench last year on the defensive end. I mean, he was a great defender. He was 89th in a defensive rebounding percentage, and he was in the 300s in offensive rebounding percentage. So, I mean, he really attacked the glass in like that seventh man role. They're going to need more offense out of him. He showed a lot of offensive promise as a young player at Alabama, where he was more of a wing. This past year, he didn't look like a wing at all. I mean, he looked like a pure power forward. If he can kind of revive some of that offensive skill, and when he was being recruited out of high school, he was a top 60, top 70 player. He was seen as like a point forward type who could handle the ball and could pass and could create. So I mean, if he can kind of show off some of those skills, that would be really beneficial to a Virginia offense that definitely needs more options.
Well, if you look at it, I mean, the freshman year at Alabama, that team did not have really any offensive creators. I mean, they weren't a very good team. They were like an NIT team, but they had Dazon Ingram, Riley Norris, Avery Johnson Jr., Corbin Collins, who was like a grad transfer, I want to say.
Yeah, from Morehead State.
And they had like Dante Hall and Armand Davis as younger guys. They needed someone to just go get shots. And he was fairly successful in that role. He was that point forward. He averaged 2.5 assists a game. He turned it over a lot, but he could step out and shoot the three. He made basically 3 a game at 33%. If he got downhill, he got to the free throw line. That's the type of role he's going to have to be able to play for this team. If they're going to get to their ceiling, he's going to have to be. I think he's going to have to be a double-figure scorer. I penciled him at the 3. I had it as Kihei Clark, Casey Morsell, with those two kind of sharing the backcourt with the ball-dominant 2-guard look and the game manager at the 1. Key at the 3, Mamadi Kite at the 4, and Jay Huff at the 5. I guess it depends on what you would consider both those guys. I guess Huff would probably be the 4 in that lineup because he's going to step out and shoot threes. Doesn't really matter. It's a too big look. It's somewhat they can definitely play that smaller look with Key at the 4. Wilton Tenze. I'm just worried they don't have another guard. They just run out of backcourt guys. So I would pencil Key at the 3, Kite at the 4, Huff at the 5. And I think Huff's a guy who has a ton of talent. I don't think he totally was good enough defensively for Tony Bennett. I remember that being something that people said was the problem why he wasn't playing more, because he was a guy who always popped when he was on the floor.
Well, I mean, they had Salt in front of him, who was great screener. He was great in the context of Virginia's system. Then you had Giacchite too, and with like Hunter and stuff, like you weren't going to play bigs together too often, so he was kind of relegated into that smaller role. But he should play a lot this year. I mean, he should play in the 20 to 25 minute of the game range. Simply because you mentioned, I mean, the bench isn't very deep at all. So I have Clark, Morsell, Wilton Tenze, Key, and Giacchite as the starters. But just how it works out, I mean, Key's going to play a lot of 3. Giacchite is going to play a lot of 4. And, we're going to see some Huff and Giacchite looks, and some Huff and Cafaro and Giacchite and Cafaro. They're just going to have to play together because, those are the best players on the team. And so they're going to have to make it work with 2 bigs. I'm sure we'll see more mover blocker. But, I mean, Huff is really skilled. I mean, he's a stretch 5. He can block some shots. I mean, if he's gotten stronger and, he can play the defense that Bennett expects, I mean, it'll be very tough to keep him off the court. And then Francisco Cafaro is like a traditional back-to-the-basket post player. He put up good numbers for Argentina in FIBA, and he's like a Willie Hernan Gomez-esque big. The concern with him is he broke a bone in his leg last year, which caused him to redshirt last year, and then he also apparently has back issues too. So his his health is something to watch because they're going to need his low post offense.
Yeah, so I have the bench just being a 3-man bench, which is pretty much what they did last year, so would be surprising. Wolden Tensei is the first guard off the bench. He could be the backup point guard for Clark. He can back up Morcell at the 2. He can play the 3. I guess I don't know who's the 3 and who's the 2. If Morcell is like the bigger physical guy and Wolden Tensei is the shooter, even though he's taller, it doesn't really matter. And then I had Justin McCoy getting minutes over Cody Statman as like a 3-4. He can shoot the ball a little bit. He's like a dynamic driver. He's somewhat like Braxton Key from what I was watching of him. I didn't watch a ton of his tape. So he's a guy who could slide into the rotation. They're higher on him than his recruiting ranking, and then Kafar as the backup 5. Caden Sheedrick is really the X factor because, like I said, he's very skinny. I think he's a guy who's probably better as a junior than he is as a freshman. But the question is, how much do you play him this year? If nothing else, because they have a scholarship open right now, I believe. I'm not 100% sure of that.
Yeah, because they have Hauser sitting out, so that would give them a 13th open.
Right. So I think they have one open. They're already having one guy sit out. Can you afford another red shirt and be at 10 guys with one of those guys being Austin Castro, who's never really played?
Well, I mean, he wouldn't be one of the 10 guys, Castro. Because they have the starting lineup that we went through. Then they have Huff, Cafaro, McCoy, Statman, and Badachi.
Badachi, that's the guy.
But I think Sheedrick is going to redshirt just because how much can he play, right? He's a 5, and they're already sliding guys who probably should be at the 5 like Giacchite and Huff to the 4 in some situations. Key and McCoy are probably better at the 4, and they're going to be slid up to the 3. So it's just like how much can he play? He can stretch the floor. Kadeem Sheedrick. He's very athletic, very mobile. He doesn't really block shots, but he's like a athletic stretch 5, and he has a very high upside. But I think he probably redshirts this year.
Yeah, I would agree. Probably just makes sense. He's got to get stronger, and like you said, front court is a little log jammed. So yeah, strengths of this team, defense will be there. We can be confident. I think if you trotted me and you out there, they'd be a top 100 defense. Like they will be a fine defensive team. They will probably be very good because if you think about it, Key should be a very good defender. Diakite is a rim protector. Huff makes some plays defensively, although he gets lost. Clark is a pest. Morcell should be fine there. Wolden Tensei is a little skinny, but Cafaro should be able to bang on the post, do a lot of Jack Salty things. Justin McCoy is good sized. They should be fine defensively. They will be, a top 20 defense, probably top 10, maybe top 5. And then I think, the size and the options in the front court is both a blessing and a curse. But, to have a guy like Key who can play the 3 or the 4, Diakite, who was excellent down the stretch, was a guy who was a 14-7, 2 to 3 blocks in the NCAA tournament. Huff is talented. We've talked about Cafaro. McCoy, who's versatile. That's a pretty darn good front court that could, beat some teams up on the glass, beat some teams up on the interior. And then if you just get enough perimeter scoring, and then the weaknesses for me, inexperience and a lack of shot creators. I think those are the 2 pretty clear ones. We all know they don't have any, proven shot creators. It's going to be Morcell, who I think can be that role. But, you're counting on one freshman to be, the best scorer on a top 25 team, and he's not like a blue chipper. It's tough. It's really tough. I think I believe that he can be, especially if they're just going to grind games out in the 50s and 60s, but this team does not have the firepower that last year's team had, not in the slightest.
Losing 3 NBA players, right? Two first rounders, and then guy who's on a 2-way with the Kings. And all 3 of them could really shoot the ball too. It's going to be impossible to replace them this year. But I had the same strengths. The defense should definitely translate with the Clark, Key, Giacchite threesome definitely starting. You have the culture and the coaching with Tony Bennett. But for those who say Virginia has done more with less talent before, no, they have not. Virginia has not had this little of talent. Probably even when Bennett was rebuilding it in his first 2 years. They had guys like Joe Harris, Akeel Mitchell, and then the later years. they had times where they had like 6 or 7 future NBA guys on one roster. And last year they had the 3 NBA guys that Biz mentioned. I mean, don't try to fool yourself that they've had less talent in this, because I don't even think that the bad teams have had less talent because they had Joe Harris.
I will chime in and say, we're looking back on Joe Harris because of what Joe Harris did. Casey Morcell's a guy who most people think will play in the NBA. Right, like he was really good at U19 camp, but didn't make the team because they wanted Isaac Likely. But I mean, he was really good at USA camp. He's a guy who might be a 2-year 2 and done, might be a 1 and done, might be a 3 and done, but he's going to be in the NBA at some point. Diakite, if he can maintain that level of play, was a guy who at least considered the draft process. Was a guy who'd probably get a 2-way at the very least. So they have at least 2 potential NBA players on this team. He was a top 60 recruit. Walton Henze, elite JUCO. Jay Huff was a good recruit who has a ton of talent. They're not so talent poor. Now they're not talent poor. They don't have enough talent to be a top 15 team unless Tony Bennett is a wizard. But they have a little more, I think, than you might be giving credit for. Like Joe Harris wasn't Joe Harris until he started making shots. There's no reason that Casey Morcell can't be Joe Harris level.
I guess that's fair, but I would still any successful Virginia team has had way more talent than this. I don't think that's in question.
Right? Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. And then loaded front court, which we mentioned is a strength, and their roster is pretty versatile, but they don't really have enough depth to really truly utilize the versatility. For the key questions, I mean, they all revolve around the one central question of who is going to score, right? So can Kihei Clark transform from an elite glue guy to a main offensive contributor? Because Ty Jerome was certainly the late shot creator last year. It's a completely different role for Clark. Can Giacchite finally take the breakout step that people like myself have been kind of predicting for him for a few years now? They have we touched on Braxton Key earlier. Can he revive that offensive package? And then will Morcell / Walton Tenze, will they be good enough to be immediate perimeter scorers?
Okay, so what would have to happen for you? So where are they in the composite right now? Let's first ask that question.
Okay, composite ranking. Virginia is 15th.
Okay. And what would they have to do, in your mind, for them to be a top 15 team in the country? What would have to happen?
So I'll just say where I have them right now.
Sure.
I have them at 32.
Okay.
So basically, I had a pretty clear top 25. I thought Washington, Oregon, were the best outside it. So that's 26, 27. Then I put the 4 teams that are pretty much running it back from being NIT, Providence, Colorado, Georgetown, Davidson, and then I put Virginia right there at 32. So 1 behind Davidson, 1 in front of Purdue. I mean, this is going to be an elite defense, but I think the main thing that's going to determine their success, I think, is Kihei Clark. I mean, Michael Hunter wrote an article maybe a month or 2 ago about because he didn't rank Virginia, got the pushback, and then he kind of went back and found all these tweets about Kihei Clark from fans who wanted him off the team. Oh, Bennett, why are you playing Kihei Clark? He stinks, blah blah blah. And he had like all these tweets about Virginia fans hating on Clark, and then boom, Jerome, Guy, Hunter were gone, and now Clark's good enough to be a point guard on a top 15 team. So I think he's the key, because if he's as good as revisionist history Virginia fans make him out to be, then this team will certainly be top 15. I was talking about this earlier with 3-man weave in regards to Seton Hall, right? Like, people have Seton Hall 11 and 12 or a 13th, right, in the country, but that's because of the drop off, right? Like, no one really sees Seton Hall as like a title contender. Really, it's more of, they're the best of a group, right? They're more of like a top 20 caliber team who gets pushed to top 15. So I don't think it's outlandish at all to say that if Clark makes a jump, Virginia could be in that Seton Hall, Alabama, Baylor range.
Yeah, so if I recall correctly, a couple podcasts after the season ended, we did our top 25s for the coming season, and I had Virginia like 10th, and you shredded me. You just took me outside and absolutely hammered my decision making. And I was like, dude, I can talk myself into it. I can talk myself into Virginia being good. It's too high. I know. I'm going to talk myself into it. I bumped him down to 16 for my post-Kerry Blackshear top 25. I think that's probably where I'm going to keep him. I think I might go down to like 20. But I think they're going to be really good defense. I think Morcell's going to be, a top 5 freshman in this conference. I think Wolden Tenze will hit shots at a 40% clip. I think Key will be solid. I think Diakite will be an all ACC player. That to me is enough to keep them like possibly the 4th best team in the ACC.
Yeah, I mean, I have them fifth in the ACC. I think I just have Florida State in front of them, and then you probably have Florida State behind them. But for me, I mean, even if guys like Diakite and Marcel and Wolden Tenze step up, I mean, point guard is so important. And I think we've seen time and time again these rosters that look good except for the point guard. Those teams usually kind of fall apart. Cincinnati's been an exception, right? They were like a 2 seed when they kind of struggled through having Justin Jennifer and Kane Broome as their point guard. But they had NBA players around them, right? They had Gary Clark and Jacob Evans. So maybe to your point, like if a Diakite and Morcel can play like NBA guys, maybe they can kind of alleviate the point guard concerns. But
I think you're making out Kihei to be a little worse than he is. I think he might be what he is already. But this was a guy who won Peach Jam with Oakland Soldiers and was awesome. This is a guy who, he's a game manager. He makes smart plays. We look back at the play against Purdue, everyone looks up. For a freshman to have the presence of mind to advance the ball like that and find Diakite for the shot that sent them to overtime. I mean, he is a great decision maker. He is a good ball mover. He can step out and shoot threes, especially off the catch. I don't know if he can do it off the bat. I don't know if he can truly run a team without another ball dominant guy. And in fairness, Casey Morcell can be that ball dominant guy next to him. I think you might be underrating Kihei a little bit. I'm not saying it's impacting your view of them. I think your view of them is fair, but I think you might be selling Kihei a little short of what he is, which I think is a very solid game manager who is a good defender and can step out and shoot threes and can handle the ball and make good decisions.
Okay. Yeah, I still think top 10 is too high. I still think 15 is too high. I think, I mean, obviously I ranked him at 32, so I think they should be in that range more so than the top 25. But people love to go with the proven coach over a talented roster, and we've seen that backfire a few times with West Virginia, Iowa State a couple years ago, Wisconsin a couple years ago, and then you have the talented rosters that flame out like Western Kentucky, St. John's. So I mean, it cuts both ways. The defense is really what kind of changed my mind in terms of not even being open to them being a top 25 team. But I mean, the roster's not good, right? I mean, you're betting on a lot of guys stepping into bigger roles and making jumps, and you're betting on the defense being elite, which I think is fair. But we already hashed out the Clark thing, but I'm definitely trying to focus on selling on teams with bad point guards, or at least bad point guards comparatively, and then try to buy teams with better point guards.
Yeah, no, I'll buy that for sure. I think they'll be. It's just hard for me not to buy stock in Tony Bennett. I think they'll be. I think there's a floor of a team that's that good defensively. I don't know if how high that floor is, but I think there's a floor. I'll be excited to find out what it is. Looking at the non-conference schedule, they open with Syracuse, and that weird ACC is going to open games with conference games. It's super weird, but it might be a really fun game. It's a road game for them. It'll be a test in a tough atmosphere against a probably bubble team in Cuse. And they have hosting James Madison, Columbia. They host Vermont, which could be an interesting game. They go to Mohegan Sun and play UMass, and then either Arizona State or St. John's. Maine, they go to Purdue in the ACC Big Ten, which would be a fun rematch. They still have one game missing on the schedule. They also have Stony Brook, South Carolina, and Navy. So a pretty light schedule for them to work into things.
Yeah, I mean, that Syracuse game is going to be so fun because it's like our first look at this new Virginia team, and it's not against like a bye game. It's against a team that probably top 75-ish.
If they beat Syracuse, there's a very good chance that they go into conference play at 11-1. Or, yeah, 11-1 I think would be the record. Because at worst, right? I mean, you're gonna probably lose at Purdue, but even that's not a gimme. I think they might be better than Purdue. South Carolina at home, they should win that game. It's a bunch of bye games, and then like Arizona State or St. John's on a neutral, they're better than those teams.
Yeah.
So they could go in 11-1, 12-0, something like that, and I mean that
they'll be number one in the country.
They'll be number 1, number 2, number 3. So it'll be really fun. But I don't think we could have chosen 2 more different teams to preview today.
I mean, there's a certain quality that we want, right? We want a lot of turnover in terms of roster. Both certainly had that, and then we want, teams that we kind of have different opinions on, which we've struggled to kind of find up to this point. But I think Virginia certainly qualifies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's tough for us to have different opinions because we're smarter than everyone else.
Exactly.
But now we appreciate you all joining us today, listening in on Missouri State, and on, of course, how could we ever forget Virginia, the national champions, a mid-major from the Valley, and a defending national championship team from the ACC. It's a lot of fun. We hope you'll join us in the coming weeks for the CBB Central Podcast. We're going to have a lot of good content coming up with a lot of, so some more coach interviews, some more deep dives, and, of course, into preview season as we move along. So we appreciate you listening and hope you have a great night.